So, a couple of months ago, I made a video talking about my ideas, hopes and expectations for a potential Crash Bandicoot 5. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend giving it a watch, but in it I came up with a plot for the game which was basically a retelling of the Wrath of Cortex, only expanded and fleshed out to include more characters and more plot details. Even though it contained new elements, it wasn't exactly an original story, so I was wondering, how would I handle a completely original plot for a Crash Bandicoot game? Crash games aren't exactly known for their incredible stories, but it's still good to have a strong narrative, so how would I approach it? I should probably mention that I'm going to take some liberties with the idea of a completely original story, as some elements will be based on things from other games in the series, but as for the events that take place, they'll be original. Mostly. Before I get into it, there are some things I should explain. Firstly, this story takes place at some point after Crash 4, so that means the Wrath of Cortex, Twinsanity, Titans and Mind of a Mutant have not happened, at least not yet. Also, this story would not necessarily take place directly after Crash 4, there would most likely be some wacky Crash adventures between Crash 4 and this story. Anyway, let's not waste any more time. Our story begins with Crash, Coco and Torna chilling out on the beach, when they're suddenly approached by a bewildered and exhausted Papu Papu. Given his history, the Bandicoots are prepared to fight against him, but he explains that he needs the Bandicoots' help. Apparently, Papu Papu's village has been overrun by an army of monsters. Sensing that Papu has no evil intent, Aku Aku encourages the Bandicoots to trust him and see what's going on. Upon arriving, the Bandicoots discover that the village has been taken over by Spikes, who are being commanded by Koala Kong. The Bandicoots drive the Spikes out of the village, causing Kong to retreat into the Lost City ruins. They follow him into the ruins, chase him down and defeat him. After Kong is defeated, a hologram of Cortex appears. Kong was ordered by Cortex to dispose of anyone or anything that might interfere with his latest plan, and was contacting him to check in on his progress. Noticing that Kong was defeated by the Bandicoots, he gets angry, but quickly regains his composure and starts bragging about this evil plan, daring our heroes to try and stop him. The hologram disappears, and shortly afterwards the Bandicoots hear some explosions that seem to be coming from the coast of the island. Torna says that she'll return to the village to make sure the Spikes are gone and that the villagers are all safe, and suggests that Crash and Coco check out the explosions. Crash and Coco head to the beach, only to find Ripperoo bombing the coast, accompanied by an army of E-Electrics, who are carrying a mysterious blue substance emerging from the explosions to a submarine. Roo notices Crash and Coco and flees into the submarine, and Crash and Coco dive underwater to pursue him. They infiltrate the submarine to confront Roo, who is receiving a hologram from Cortex. Cortex orders Roo to head to a nearby cave to assist the Komodo Bros after he's done at the coast. Roo, who is jumping around and losing his mind, of course wasn't paying attention. After noticing the Bandicoots, Roo attacks. They fight and Roo is obviously defeated. The submarine rises to the surface of the water and the Bandicoots head to the cave that Cortex mentioned. Crash and Coco enter the cave, and heading deeper down they find an army of Magmadons mining away for more of that mysterious blue substance. They're spotted by the Komodo brothers, and they warn Crash and Coco that they have no idea what they're getting into. The Bandicoots head deeper into the mine until they reach the bottom, where they discover a massive underground lake of this mysterious blue substance. The Komodo brothers follow them in and thank the Bandicoots for finding the jackpot for them. They fight and obviously the Bandicoots win. After their defeat, Coco demands that they explain what Cortex is up to. Mo, being the idiot of the two brothers, blurts out that Cortex is using this mysterious blue substance called Mojo to not only create a massive army of mutants but also to power an enormous space weapon that will turn every living creature in the world into a mindless mutant soldier. Crash and Coco exit the mines, discussing their next move. And by that, I mean Coco is discussing their next move and Crash is making crash noises. As they exit the cave, they're caught in a trap. The trap was set by Nina Cortex, who was ordered by Cortex to capture the Bandicoots after he found out that Koala Kong was defeated. Nina locks the Bandicoots away in the Ice Prison, deep within the newly built Ratical Kingdom. Around this point in the story, Pinstripe is wandering the halls of Cortex's castle. He's in charge of guarding the castle and making sure there are no intruders. And he hates it. He's bored out of his mind and he wants more. He's tired of being a bodyguard and he wants to be in charge of himself, taking orders from nobody. As he's wandering the halls, he overhears Embryo muttering to himself. In Crash 4, Embryo alludes to the fact that his goal is to overthrow Cortex, and he's muttering about the same thing here. Pinstripe hears this, and Embryo's wishes conveniently match up with his own. He approaches Embryo with a plan, to which Embryo excitedly agrees. Crash and Coco are trapped in a cell within the ice prison with seemingly no way out. Luckily, Torna swings in out of nowhere and busts them out. When Coco asks how she found them, Torna simply says that a giant kingdom made of ice popping up out of nowhere would pique anyone's interest. Coco fills Torna in with everything going on, including the stuff about Mojo and the giant space weapon. Torna says she heard some of the guards talking about a factory that was built on the ruins of Cortex's old power plant. She heads off to investigate and encourages Crash and Coco to pursue Nina to find out more about Cortex's operation. Crash and Coco make it through the kingdom, which is swarming with Raticals, and eventually they reach Nina. They fight her, and they win. Coco demands to know more about what Cortex is up to. Reluctantly, Nina tells her what she knows. Apparently she doesn't know much, but she does know that the nearest operation will soon be taking place in the desert wastelands, where Tiny and an army of rhino rollers will be digging for Mojo. Nina suggests that if they want to beat Cortex, they should get there before Tiny does. She then says she's had enough of this stupid scheme of her uncle's and wanders off. In order to reach the desert wastelands, Crash and Coco need to head through the jungle. Unfortunately for them, the jungle is being patrolled by Scorporilla and her army of snipes. Scorporilla was given the same orders as Koala Kong, to drive out any pests that may get in the way. Having discovered the bandicoots, Scorporilla and the snipes station themselves in the jungle, and the only way Crash and Coco can make it out of the jungle and into the desert is to go through Scorporilla. At this point in the story, Cortex is in his castle with his highest ranking henchmen, Pinstripe, Embryo, Engine, and Tiny. He's ranting and raving about how brilliant he and his plan are, when suddenly and unexpectedly for him, Pinstripe and Embryo team up to launch a mutiny. They capture him and, naturally, being Cortex's most loyal subjects, Tiny and Engine oppose this, and the two are prepared to throw down to free Cortex. Pinstripe reminds them that Cortex is in their custody, so unless they want to see their master hurt or even killed, Pinstripe suggests they stand down and follow his orders. As his mafia underlings escort Cortex to the dungeon, Pinstripe orders Tiny to head to the desert wastelands with his Rhino Roller army as initially planned, and instructs Engine to continue constructing the giant Mojo space cannon. Meanwhile, Embryo has just received information from Scorporilla that the bandicoots are in the jungle. He sends his own hologram to the bandicoots saying that they have nothing to worry about. Cortex has been defeated, he says, and he makes it clear that this is the bandicoots' final chance to back down and head home. Well, he tries to make it clear. It is Embryo, after all. Crash and Coco find his message confusing and decide to ignore it and pursue Scorporilla. As Engine returns to the factory to continue building the weapon, he receives word from a sludge of an intruder. Torna had managed to find the factory and was sussing out what was going on, but was discovered. She tries to fight back and escape, but she was overwhelmed by the number of sludges as well as Engine's mech, and she was taken prisoner. Engine informs Pinstripe about this, which gives him a diabolical idea. Crash and Coco confront Scorporilla and defeat her. Embryo attempts to check in with Scorporilla via hologram to see if she has disposed of the bandicoots yet, but once he sees her defeated, he starts to freak out. He tries to regain his composure, but because he's Embryo, he can't. Instead, he is pushed away and Pinstripe takes over the hologram. Once he works out what happened to Scorporilla, he gets annoyed. Coco boasts about how she and Crash are going to foil their evil plans. Aware that Crash and Coco will be heading to the desert next, Pinstripe reveals that Torna has been taken prisoner, and that she's being guarded in the mountains. The mountains have been overtaken by Grimleys, hence the new name Mount Grimley, and has become a very dangerous area. If they want to save Torna, they're going to have to head there instead of continuing to the desert, and so that's what they do. Crash and Coco reach the base of the mountain, which is swarming with Grimleys. The mountain is being overseen by Embryo. Crash and Coco climb the mind-boggling mountain, scaling the outside and traversing the inside, and reach the summit where Torna is being held. To free her, Crash and Coco must defeat Embryo, and once they do, Torna is freed. They demand answers on what's going on, but Embryo only says what he said earlier, that Cortex has been defeated, the thought of which makes him giddy with pride and excitement. He mutates with his mutagen to fly away and make his escape. On their way down from the mountain, Torna tells Crash and Coco what she discovered in Engine's factory. The weapon is enormous, and unless she was mistaken, it is just shy of having enough mojo to power it, which means they need to get to the desert and stop Tiny before it's too late. Torna also realized that Pinstripe was giving the orders to Engine, and that Cortex was nowhere to be found, which somewhat matches up with what Embryo had just said. The three head back down the mountain and on towards the desert. Pinstripe was clever. Because of the whole mutiny thing, the progress of their evil plan was slowed down, but by using Torna as a distraction, he was able to buy Tiny enough time to get his dig site in the desert set up. Now Pinstripe and Embryo are on track to taking over the world instead of Cortex, and will soon have enough mojo to power the Mojo Cannon. The Bandicoots reach the desert and realise that they're too late. Tiny and his Rhino Rollers have already started digging for mojo. Our heroes now need to drive off the Rhino Rollers and pursue Tiny. After traversing the desert wasteland and making their way through the dig site, the Bandicoots battle against Tiny and defeat him. Being confused with who's in charge, Torna demands that Tiny explains what's going on. He is not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he does his best. He says that Cortex was overthrown by Pinstripe and Embryo, who were both unhappy with their positions. Pinstripe and Embryo now plan to use the Mojo Cannon and rule the world instead of Cortex. Although, to be honest, Pinstripe has taken control for himself and is more interested in ruling the world, and Embryo is more satisfied with the fact that he actually managed to overthrow Cortex in the first place. And now, having dug up the mojo in the desert, they have enough mojo to fire the Mojo Cannon. All that's left to be done is finish its construction and haul it off into space. Bearing no loyalty to neither Pinstripe nor Embryo, Tiny begs the Bandicoots to defeat them and save his master, and the Bandicoots agree to do so. Since the weapon is nearly complete, Coco suggests it might be a better idea to head to Engine's factory first, to stop it from being completed. The group agrees, and Torna leads the way. Engine's factory was built on the top of the ruins of Cortex's old power plant, so it's surrounded by a junkyard filled with toxic waste and the ruins of the old buildings. The place is also guarded by sludges. The Bandicoots make their way through the ruins, the junkyard, and the factory and reach Engine. Engine is annoyed that he's been taking orders from Pinstripe and Embryo, especially Embryo. Nevertheless, he fights the Bandicoots in his mech and, of course, loses. With Engine out of the way, Coco is able to finally take a close look at the Mojo Cannon. After some analysis of the machine and some quick calculations on her tablet, she concludes that the cannon could actually be reconfigured to reverse the Mojo mutations for the creatures who have already been turned into mutant soldiers. She tells Engine to do so while she and Crash head on to Cortex Castle to confront Pinstripe and Embryo, and Torna stays behind to keep an eye on Engine. Crash and Coco begin to scale the castle, which isn't far from Engine's factory. The place is crawling with battlers, and all of the henchmen under Pinstripe's command are guarding the place too, with the exception of Engine, who's being watched by Torna, Tiny, who is also nowhere to be seen, and interestingly, Nina is missing as well. The Bandicoots make their way up the castle, avoiding attempts to stop them by the likes of Koala Kong, Ripperoo, the Komodo brothers, and Scorporilla, and Embryo makes one final stand to defend the throne room where Pinstripe is waiting. Embryo is of course unable to stop them. Pinstripe is frustrated by this, understandably. He pulls out his Tommy gun, as do his Mafia goons, and he faces off against the Bandicoots. It's important to note that this boss fight would have two phases. After Pinstripe is defeated in the first phase, Embryo recovers from his defeat just outside the throne room and jumps in to help. So far in this story, Embryo has failed to stop the Bandicoots not once, but twice. This, in addition to being so close to world domination but being on the brink of defeat, made Pinstripe furious. At the last minute, he betrays Embryo by swiping some of his mutagen formula from it, drinks it, and pushes Embryo back so hard that he falls out a window and lands in the ocean below. Pinstripe mutates and the second phase of the fight begins. He is of course still defeated by the Bandicoots. He collapses and falls unconscious as his mutation wears off, and Crash and Coco celebrate their victory. But the adventure doesn't end there. After Pinstripe was defeated, the Earth started to shake as if a rocket was taking off. And it was. Torna could hear mutant Pinstripe's screams from the factory, and she rushed over to make sure her Bandicoot pals were okay. But that was a foolish move. Rather than reconfiguring the cannon like Coco told him to, Engine had just continued building the cannon as intended. I mean, how was Torna going to know any different? It also turns out that after Tiny was defeated, he, by sheer coincidence, bumped into Nina, and he explained to her that her uncle had been overthrown, and she reluctantly agreed to help Tiny out. While Crash and Coco were distracted with Pinstripe, Nina and Tiny stuck into the castle dungeons and freed Cortex, and the three of them headed to Engine's factory, where they climbed inside his mech and launched into space, taking the completed Mojo Cannon with them. Noticing this, the Bandicoots head back to the factory and climb into a backup mech, and Coco flies them up into space, following Cortex. This is the finale of the story. With the Bandicoots now on Cortex's space station, they need to make their way through the labs and hangars up to the centre before the TKs finish preparing the Mojo Cannon. Nina, Tiny and Engine, alongside the TKs on board the space station, all try to stop the Bandicoots, but are unsuccessful. The Bandicoots reach Cortex and fight him, and they're successful, and due to the aftermath of the fight, the space station begins to explode and fall apart. Cortex, Engine, Nina and Tiny all escape in an escape pod, but our heroes are still stuck on board. The space station then starts falling towards the Earth, but luckily it lands in the ocean not far from Insanity Beach and our heroes survive. They swim back to shore. With the space station and the Mojo Cannon destroyed, the world is safe from being taken over. As for the Titans that had already been mutated, well, there's no way to reverse the mutation anymore, so they just become part of the ecosystem on the Wampa Archipelago. Cortex and co managed to escape though, so no doubt they will return with another evil scheme even more villainous than the last. As for the rest of the villains, Koala Kong, Ripperoo, the Komodo brothers and Scorporilla all leave Pinstripe's command to go off and do whatever they please. Embryo washes up on the shore of Cortex Island. You'd think he'd be furious with Pinstripe's betrayal and the failure of the whole plan, but he isn't bothered. He's just happy he technically succeeded in his goal of overthrowing Cortex. Pinstripe, despite still being frustrated with his loss, goes back to his Mafia boss ways, and Crash, Coco and Torna celebrate their victory by chilling out on the beach, just like how our story began. And that wraps up my idea for a completely original Crash Bandicoot story. I hope you liked it. I considered adding in other characters like Dingadile, Crunch and the Entropies, but since it's ambiguous and uncertain as to when this story would actually take place, I decided to leave them out. Their inclusion would have felt a bit forced anyway. Let me know what you think of this plot in the comments, and also leave your own ideas for how you would handle an original story there too. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you did. Thanks for watching, guys.